If you're an athlete, you know the greatest motivator of all is the fear of letting your teammates down. After all, a team is only as good as its weakest link. So you owe it to those wearing the same jersey as you to be your best every time you step on the field. That's why there's no vape in team. When you vape, you can expose your lungs to toxic chemicals that can damage your lungs. If you're a step behind, the team's a step behind. Brought to you by The Real Cost and the FDA.
Hello, Dave here, and you're listening to The Cinemile, the podcast where we walk home from the movies. But we're not doing that today. Today we're talking about video games. My wife, Kathy, is not here today because she don't want to play no video games. But I found someone who does, my friend Tom Silcock, who joins me every year to tell me all about the games I missed. Hi, Tom.
Hi. That's largely the crux of it, isn't it? I feel like I've been in the same boat this year, Dave. I've missed a lot of them.
Yes, we should say in advance, normally, so we've done this for a few years now, and normally I rely on Tom. I don't have time to play video games anymore, much to my own chagrin. And so I usually live vicariously through Tom at the end of the year, and he tells me about all the things I missed, and I struggle to put a top 5 together. And I was just about to text Tom, I'm sorry, Tom, I don't even have a top 5 this year. I have a top 4, but then he beat me to it with his own text, saying that he also has a top 4.
It's a top 3.5 at best. It's been a weird year for games. I feel like there's not been heaps of releases worth jumping on, but we've got the big ones. We've covered the main ones, I think.
Don't blame the games, Tom. It's not the game's fault that you didn't play
Famously, don't hate the player, hate the games.
I guess we're just busy. We're just busy old guys now, you know. We don't.
Time. That sounds right.
I think. Well, and also I suspect that there's a bit of crossover on our list. Nonetheless, we're going to crack on. So this is a classic top 4. You know, top 4 of the year. You know, people
famous format.
Round out their top 4s. So let's get into it. So we'll go. As always, we don't know each other's lists. There won't be any spoilers for any of these games, but these are going to be our by definition, these are our top 4. They're the only 4 we played. I mean, but all of mine were good. I'm gonna let you go first, Tom. So what was your number 4 game?
By top 4, this is the top 4, and by extension, the worst games that I've played this year. They're the only games.
I also forgot one caveat. I don't know if this applies to your list, Tom, but and I say this every year. The games I played this year. This is the top 4 games I played this year. Some of them didn't come out in 2023, so they're not the top 4 games of 2023. Just to make this list even more elaborate and unsuspected.
Now that's what I call content. All right, yeah.
All right, go Tom. What's your number 4?
No, similar boat. I think that's fair as well. Like a lot of the games that come out in kind of like November, December of last year kind of spill over into the games that you end up playing this year, so they might as well be in this year's release cycle. But that said, I have nonetheless sprinted through as fast as I could in preparation for this, as much of Spider-Man 2 as I possibly could.
Great.
In time for it. Have you played the other ones, Dave? I forget.
I bought a PS4 just to play Spider-Man, the first game, right? Because that was an exclusive title back in 2017-ish, 2018 maybe.
That's the one, yeah. It's Insomniac. They're the people who bought us Ratchet and Clank. They're part of the Sony family, but no, just really, really good developers. Really, really tight gameplay on the original Spider-Man. Then they had Miles Morales, I think, last year or the year before last, which was also like a great build on that, sort of moving it into PlayStation 5 world. But Spider-Man 2, really, really well-rounded as a game. It's more of what you love, and I think, you know, maybe there's something to say that's just a bit of sort of fan service, really, and they've not put too many innovations on the table. It all feels a little derivative of other things that they've already done, but nonetheless, the writing's just really tight. The humour, I think, is quite befitting of all of the characters and lands nicely. I think that's something as well, as it feels like it is a Spider-Man game. All of the dialogue from Spider-Man feels genuine. I think that's a problem that Marvel have had generally with their films of the last few years, is where suddenly everyone's quipping like Spider-Man. It just gets a bit much, but like when you're in a Spider-Man world, I buy that. That's good. That's fair. That seems honest.
They're quipping and thwipping.
Quipping and thwipping. That's it. The two have to go together. It should be a caveat. It should be in the brand guidelines, I think. But No, really good. And I mean, as it's Spider-Man 2, you play with, get this, 2 Spider-Men. What?
What? 2 for 1.
Well, certainly that's how you start the game, where you're playing as both Miles and Peter, which is really nice. And the character swapping stuff, the kind of thing that featured in Grand Theft Auto 5? Was that the one where they started swapping? Yeah, you can do that on the fly now, but as opposed to having a slightly bizarro sat-nav-like cutscene that takes you between characters, it's instantaneous. The load times are insane on the PlayStation 5.
Wow.
And they really, really start showing off with that. It's like the fast travel as well. It's like, where do you want to be? You're there. There's no loading. There's no rotating things in a menu system. I'm looking at you, Skyrim, and others.
Although
it just loads in.
Why do you want to fast travel in Spider-Man? Half the fun is swinging around the city, right?
Well, exactly, yeah. And they've put some new traversal systems in as well. Like, you have the additions of the web wings, which are really good, so that you can sort of like move through the airstreams of the city, which is, even faster. I feel like a lot of the things that they're doing in the game now is just showing off the technology and showing off the hardware of the PlayStation 5. It's almost a bit of a spec game in some respects, because there's one mission where I think you end up moving through portals and they just zip you through the city. It's very reminiscent of Rift Apart, which is also an Insomniac game, but you're just showing off now. You're loading this bit of the city in because you can. There's no real narrative reason for this. It's just a right laugh. No, really good, really, really strong. You've got some introductions of some new characters. You've got the sort of the symbiote suit kind of thing, very Venom-esque stuff that's being weaved in. You've also got the addition of Craven the Hunter, who for some reason has an army, but we won't gloss over that.
He's the big bad, right?
Yeah, he's certainly one of the main bads, as is always the case with the Spider-Man stories. They get very conflated in terms of what factions are doing what, and they try to kind of force factions into this as well, which is always slightly unusual. So you never just generic criminals; they're always part of some sort of group.
Well, I guess and that answers your question of why Craven has an army, because you have to have people to beat up minute to minute, don't you?
But I almost feel like I don't want to suggest, because it's very tempting to say, "Hey, I would have done things differently if I was a developer." I'm not. I don't know how to do these things. But someone like Craven was interesting because you would have thought that would have been an opportunity too. And I think other games have done this with mixed success, I think, in the past. But when you're on a mission and then someone shows up to kind of really ruin your day,
yes,
Craven would have been absolutely perfect for that. And maybe that happens in the later game, but I'm not sure.
That's a great shout. The best example of that is the Resident Evil games, right? Where the Nemesis guy shows up, and then the other fella in Resident Evil 2 who and he's always following you. Like it follows. He just shows up to ruin your day. Yeah. I think that's an interesting idea. The other thing I liked about the first Spider-Man was the sort of I get very fed up with open world games that don't put a lot of thought into their side quests, and they become very repetitive. Looking at you, Assassin's Creed. Whereas I found that the first Spider-Man game at least had, like, I don't 100% games, but I wanted to with Spider-Man, because the variety of stuff you could do in the side quest was entertaining and always different and interesting. Does that carry over into the second game?
Yeah, absolutely. That returns with force, I think. And they did this really well with the Miles Morales kind of standalone game as well, where it certainly wasn't... I mean, it wasn't priced as such. It wasn't a full game's worth of that kind of content, but it was a very easy game to 100% because, to exactly your point, all of the stuff in it was really well thought out. And that continues on into this as well. The world is very sort of populated with these fun little side quests, to the point where you'll be swinging by one of them and think, you know what, I'll actually dip in and just complete that because it's there. And I know it's not going to take me 20 minutes to do some sort of time trial or something. It's these quick, easy kind of sweep up things. And they're bespoke to both Miles and Peter as characters as well. So you will each have kind of little quests that you can pursue on the side. And they all seem to build to something as well, which I think is really quite nice.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, I like that, because it doesn't just feel... I think often those things just feel like work. Or they feel like a chore.
Yeah, isn't it?
It's like, I've got to do 20 of this fucking fetch quest thing.
Clean up jobs. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Also, looking at as good as they are, Rockstar needs to sort their stuff out, because they're all their quests and side quests essentially boil down to pick up someone and go to a place.
Taxi service.
Yeah. It's boring.
The taxi simulator.
Yeah. And part of the fun, as we said, of Spider-Man is just the travel. It's just like, it's so entertaining just to go from place to place. Okay, well, fantastic. That's on my things my much longer list of things I wish I played in 2023. But it didn't feel like I'd get the value out of buying a PS5 just for this game just yet. So maybe I'll wait a couple of years. My number 4, I played on Nintendo Switch, but I think it's available everywhere at all good consoles, or even on the phone, I think. It's Dead Cells. Did you ever play this?
I did not. No, I've not heard of Dead Cells, I don't think.
Yeah, Dead Cells is a fun little... it's a roguelike Metroidvania game, which is if you don't know what those things mean... I love the categories of video games have become so complicated now that they reference games from 20 or 30 years ago. Just to tell
it's like a Souls-like, isn't it?
Yes,
It's like another game. That's the only way we can describe it.
Can we not come up with terms to describe these things? Like we used to have beat 'em ups. Like that's a great phrase for what that thing is. You don't call it Street Fighter-esque. So yeah, roguelike means that is a genre which is typically includes permanent death and something that you have to repeat over and over again from the beginning. And Metroidvania refers to the level design of games like Metroid and Castlevania, where there is a giant map that you unlock parts of by visiting. You get a key or a laser weapon from another part of the map that unlocks the bottom right corner of the map, and it's sort of slowly unraveled. So this game Dead Cells kind of combines those two things together. You're presented with this giant sort of medieval castle that you are weirdly... I'm not even gonna, but there's no real plot to this game. I think you're a amoeba or something
I'm in. You had me at amoeba.
Yeah. You're an amoeba, a rogue amoeba, and then you take over the body of a corpse at the beginning, and then that they often like to explain the reason for this permanent death. So if your corpse dies, then you respawn at the beginning and get another corpse and keep going. But you're effectively starting the game again. But you build up. There's leveling up. There's you get increasingly. It's kind of just a bit of an RPG in action RPG, in that you're just looting and getting better gear, and I kind of like that. There's no story to this. There's not much substance, but the gameplay is good. It's something you can just pick up, whenever you feel like it. Play for 10, 20 minutes, 2 hours if you want.
That's key, isn't it? I think that's really key for a good game in this day and age, where you don't have to sit down and be locked into a 6-hour mission. You can actually just smash through a bit in 20 minutes, so you get to where you get to, save, pick up where you left off.
Exactly, and it fits my lifestyle right now as a working man and a father where you're just stealing time really here and there, and I don't have the time to commit to something like a Starfield. Spoiler: I haven't played that, or something where you really just have to just lose yourself in it. So that's my number 4. I do recommend it. It's not got a whole lot of substance in terms of story or anything, but fun, quick, kind of repetitive gameplay that rewards you.
The art style looks really stunning as well.
Yes, and look, we're living in a golden age of like indie development, aren't we? Where you've got
massively
these it's cost effective for small studios, or even just like developers or teams of 2 or 3 people coming up with some of the most interesting games that are built on the shoulders of giants like Metroid or Castlevania, and just like iterating, and a lot of the games I've spoken about on our annual podcast over the past couple of years, some of my favorites are Into the Breach. That is by Subset Games. They're just 2 guys who made FTL. Just incredibly quick, smart designs with charming pixel graphics, and away you go, and you stick it up in the Steam store, and you smash it. And so it's a very interesting game. I think game development has become very accessible, and that's my number 4. So Tom, what's your number 3 game of the year?
Well, you mentioned it earlier, and I think it's only fair that we talk about Starfield. Bethesda's latest. They've brought you the likes of the Elder Scrolls series, Skyrim, and of course the Fallout series, the much-loved Fallout series. And they've taken a punt on a new IP, which they've been calling Starfield, which is, how would you describe it? Sort of a spacefaring science fiction, bit of a space opera type story. They've set the art style as what they've called NASA punk, to add to the many collections of punks after steampunk and cyberpunk. We now have NASA punk. But yeah, it's in a very similar vein to sort of Mass Effect, elements of that, a bit of No Man's Sky, a bit of Star Citizen-esque sort of exploration. And you're playing as a member of the mysterious group Constellation on a mission to solve the remaining mysteries of the universe, sort of picking up on the legacy of what everyone else has forgotten, what NASA soon abandoned, and that's exploration. And it's set in this kind of The Expanse-esque backdrop. You've got a lot of sort of human factions, colonies and, military ones and other things. And it creates this kind of like really rich universe full of people and ideals and competing factions all looking to exact different ends. It's very akin to sort of Skyrim and Fallout in that respect as well, where you have the different factions that are all at play and all add wonderful context against this kind of otherwise quite compelling story in the background. I mean, you've sunk many an hour into a Bethesda game in the past, haven't you, Dave?
My God, yes. I would say 150 plus into Skyrim, and I got, I think, a quarter of the way through the main story.
Yeah. Sorry, Parthenax, you're going to have to take this one yourself. Yeah, it's very easy to lose yourself in this as well. I think they've taken everything that's worked brilliantly in the past, and they've brought it sort of as up to date as they can. I still think it's running off the Creation Engine, which is the same engine that they've used to make many of their games in the past. I think it's a slightly updated version, but you're starting to see the cracks in the paintwork now, I think, of the what would you call it, like the back end that they've put together to try and build this. It's nonetheless impressive, everything they've managed to cram into this. But there's still a bit of that textbook, that iconic Bethesda jank that sits across this.
Yeah.
A few glitches, a few textures not loading, a few unusual cutscenes being interrupted by things that shouldn't be happening. Yeah.
But I find that kind of charming, and it's expected in a Bethesda game. And it's not like to the cyberpunk level, famously a few years ago, where it was just kind of just broken at launch.
Yeah.
Bethesda games are kind of, there's never game breaking. It's just kind of charming jank, like Fallout, and there's a dog stuck in a wall or something, and it's not doing anyone any harm. It's not even really breaking my immersion. I'm just like, oh, look at that, I'm playing a Bethesda game.
I think when you've got a game as big and as ambitious as they try to pull together as well, I think like that is to be expected. And as you say, it's never game breaking. It's never going to undo your progress. And of course, they're patching all of the time as well, and they're doing their best in that respect. But I think Starfield has received mixed reviews throughout the year, because there's a lot of people who saw this in the same way that Cyberpunk was sort of advertised as well. It's like, oh, it's a first-person shooter in a sci-fi setting. I'm gonna, as a modern warfare player, jump in and love every second of that. It's like, that's not the game that you're getting here. If you're going in expecting a Bethesda game, you're getting a Bethesda game. You're gonna have a wonderful time. But if you're expecting something else, then perhaps not. But they've got some smart embellishments on it, I think, to build from it. But at its core, it is definitely a Bethesda game.
I watched a great video by the YouTuber Nakey Jakey. I don't know if you've seen any of his stuff. I recommend the listeners to look him up. But he did a video called "Bethesda's Game Design is Outdated," and it comes from a place of love, but he kind of speaks to what you're describing as the cracks are starting to show a little. And one thing he kind of described that wasn't working for him in this setting, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, was like Skyrim, Fallout, you're walking, right? Much like we said about the Spider-Man games, you're kind of, the journey is half the fun. You're going to that destination, you get distracted by a cave or whatever. But he said that didn't translate as well into Starfield, because you're just going in a spaceship to a planet that's largely empty. Like, did they bite off more than they could chew by adding all these planets, and then you're just walking along an empty planet?
Yeah, I think so. There's sort of two things to that. I think because it's in space, it effectively turns into a bit of a fast travel simulator. Um, Something that like the No Man's Sky did brilliantly as well with the procedural worlds and the landing stuff. It was definitely a packed universe there that made a world of sense. Whereas this, I think, in order to keep it contained, there's a lot of kind of loading from one place to another, and to that end, I remember a reviewer referring to it as a bit of a telephone simulator. But I mean, find me a Bethesda game where you don't have a conversation like this. It's like, I need the blueprints from that person. You know, I'm not going to take no for an answer. You go to that person, like, oh, over my dead body, and then you kill them, and you take the blueprints back, and they're like, oh my god, you killed them. That's not what I wanted. Have some money anyway. And it's that over and over again. But you know, the dialogue is rich. The characters are a lot of fun in this. So that kind of stuff is forgivable. Yeah, certainly on a planetary level. The procedurally, and I use the term in air quotes because the extent to which it's procedural and the extent to which a few of those bases just crop up over and over again on different planets is something that can get a little frustrating, especially when you're landing on a planet. It's like, oh, you've got to go to this abandoned mine. It's like, oh, is it the same abandoned mine I saw on this other planet, just slightly reskinned to be icy this time? But you know, it's. A lot of that stuff is just there to give the world some texture. They're not baked into the quests. I think all of the set pieces in the quests are kind of quite well thought through. Which, you know, there's a lot to love in that respect. But no, I completely understand the criticisms of it being a slightly, you know, a bit sparse in terms of a world. But you know, when you're pumping a game full of thousands of planets, I don't know what people are expecting, that we're going to meticulously hand design every single one of these. You know. Contained expectations, I think.
Yeah, and even No Man's Sky, which has been said in the same breath as this a lot, which did do that sort of fluid transportation. I mean, I played that game a lot, and that gets boring and repetitive as well to a point. But it's lacking that. It's kind of, that's too freeform. There's no real structure there to a plot, or it's all just random and generated, so you've nothing to really grasp onto, or very little, I think. So it's kind of like there is something has got to give if you want structured story and campaign to a point.
Yeah,
and then freedom.
And I think that's a lot of what they've got right this time, is that there is a compelling story, and you have like a cast of characters that you do get to know. And I think that was perhaps one of the drawbacks of some of their other games as well, where it's like you've got all of these factions, but you're kind of allegiant to none of them because you're flitting between them, and then you never really get to know anyone. Whereas this, because you are with Constellation, there's then a cast of characters that you get to know very well. And then some of the more emotional beats in the story really land because you're invested in these people, which I think is great. And they also do the smart move of having a crew that's made up mostly of these members of Constellation, gives you a persistent cast to bounce off. So every time you get back to your ship, all of the stuff that worked brilliantly with Mass Effect still rings true with this as well.
Oh, how does that stack up to Mass Effect? I know they're very different sort of game designs.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to think of this is very much Bethesda's attempt at making a Mass Effect. They've not quite nailed it in all of the places, but you know, in terms of the type of story that they're trying to tell, the way that you interact with the world, it is very, very reminiscent of Mass Effect. Again, I don't think it does stack up against Mass Effect because Mass Effect is just a much, much tighter game. You think about the level design, you think about the actual story there. It's all quite contained. It's all actually quite on the rails. So you have the option to opt into some of these side quests in Mass Effect. But realistically, once you get to a planet, there's not much exploration to be done.
No, there's always one promenade and 6 rooms off the promenade.
Yeah.
yeah. And
it's a lot of kind of get that tablet back to me. I left it in the other end of this room.
Exactly. But I think the joy of Mass Effect was that they the world felt really deep and rich, and the sort of the how well thought out the species and the universe was, and the sort of history that all painted over the cracks and the limitations of the fact that you are standing in one promenade with 6 rooms off it. Like, it felt like a huge universe.
Massively. And I think the story and the setting that they've kind of written into this is deep enough to cover most of the cracks. I still don't think it's a patch on what Mass Effect has managed to achieve, and certainly Mass Effect 2 as a world building, backdrop. of which to set a story. This has just got a lot of tropes. There's a militarized faction, and there's kind of like some space cowboys, and then there's a cyberpunk looking area and stuff. It's like it's all very derivative of things that I've seen before. But nonetheless, I do think it works for what they're doing. I mean, I've sunk an ungodly number of hours into this, and I think mostly because they gave me a stupid little ship, and I could build my own stupid little ship and fill it with people that I wanted in my stupid little ship and fly around the universe. And that's all I want.
That's all you want.
That's all I want.
That's all anyone
being
wants.
Unreasonable.
What did you play it on? On Xbox?
I played it on the Xbox Series S, and it holds up. It can absolutely function on that. But I played a lot of it through Xbox Game Pass and the cloud gaming. So on like a 720p stream, getting about 6 frames a second from some varying janky internet connections. But still, even then, I thought it was good enough to keep pushing on with.
On what? Just running it through...
Yeah, like either on my laptop or I've got one of those backbone things you can put on your phone as well.
Nice.
So
Okay.
yeah, just streaming straight through the Wi-Fi. But if you love a Bethesda game, there's nothing to dislike in this. If you're new to the world of Bethesda, this probably isn't the starting point.
I love it. Yeah. And, well, look, I think that's it. If you know what you're getting into, and I do, then I'm definitely going to give this a go when I have a spare 150 hours next year.
I would say one of the more interesting things that they've done with it is the New Game Plus element, because that now serves a narrative reason. There's a purpose behind New Game Plus in this. I don't want to say too much more, because if anyone is playing it, they'll see what that can result in, but it is really interesting in terms of the many universes this sort of sets up, and how a New Game Plus run through won't necessarily be the same as your first one.
Okay.
I won't say too much more, but worth reading into.
Multiverse. Okay, cool. My number 3 of the year is one that I think you recommended this last year. In fact, I'm very sure you did, which was Citizen Sleeper. Right, that was on your
Citizen Sleeper. It was, yeah, really good.
So I hadn't heard of this when we spoke last year, and I went and sought it out, and I was like, yeah, Tom knows what he's talking about. This is very good. So I downloaded it on Steam, and I also think this is available. This is one of those small, light games that is on Switch. It'll probably end up on mobile. It would probably work well there.
Yeah, massively. Yeah.
This is it's an RPG, but it's a very light game. It's very narrative and story driven. It is it's real bare bones. It's basically a sci-fi setting. You are essentially an android, although they have a name for it. What is the name? Is it Sleeper? What? I don't remember.
Oh gosh, I think it might be a Sleeper. I can't remember.
It's got its own little lore. It's set in the future. You're basically a sort of a synthetic who has you have a certain amount of time to live, right? You're about to expire, and you are basically trying to claw back as much time as you can, while living on a space station and kind of trying to get by. So there's a sort of a resource management element to this game. You're trying to keep you have to sleep, you have to eat, despite being a synthetic, and then you kind of just take jobs and you navigate the story, and then stuff kind of happens. It's all done in a sort of a storybook, comic book way, so you know there's no animations as such, just kind of pictures of characters will appear with text and dialogue, but very good, very well written, good voice acting, and it's got a really novel idea of using dice to resolve actions, much like a sort of tabletop role-playing game. But you use the dice as a resource, which I really liked as well. So you get you start with 2 dice or 3 dice or something, and you can spend those 3 dice on 3 actions during the day to try and succeed.
Yeah, the resource management side of it, mixed in with the kind of the chance of the dice, is a really interesting gameplay element that I've not really seen many other things even attempt, because of the obvious challenges. But it is, like you say, how it all kind of weaves into each other, where you think, okay, I need to make sure I eat today, and I need to sleep enough, because if I don't do that, then I'm not going to have enough dice rolls for the next day, and then the next day gets much harder because you don't have as many die, and then you're going to have less chances to re-roll things, and it's a very unusual sort of gameplay loop.
Exactly, and there's nothing like it. So top marks for originality, lovely design, again, it feels like one of those games. I didn't look into this, but it probably was just made by a handful of people, and done really, really effectively. It's really sparse. It's very clever, and the world sort of slowly unfolds as a bit like a Metroidvania, where the station kind of starts to unlock bit by bit. So
you have the cycles as well, don't you? Which is like a lot of countdown elements where you'll know that something bad is going to happen in 4 days. So you've kind of got to get your act together before that runs out, and that kind of sense of time pressure and the perils of that is you often see time. I feel like that was a thing back in the noughties and even before that, where a lot of games and missions would have like a kind of a countdown timer against them, and there was a sense of pressure and urgency to get things done. That seems to have been void for a very long time. So to see it come back in this context is really interesting.
It's exactly right, and it creates so much conflict and tension, which propels the thing along. And for example, there could be like, and they stack up. You owe money to a bartender, and you've got 3 days to pay them, and that bounty hunter that's looking for you is going to be back in 5 days, and there's only...
And you still got to eat.
Yeah, exactly.
You still got to eat and sleep at that time. Yeah.
So just really, really good. If you like tabletop role playing games, or just any sort of RPGs, that's more narratively driven. There's not a lot of... The gameplay is kind of light here, but it's kind of it's like a leveled up interactive graphic novel, I would describe it as.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's called Citizen Slipper. Not Slipper.
Citizen Slipper.
You play one half of a slipper.
A hard-boiled slipper. Be the streets. Yeah.
It's like the Shoe People. Do you remember that show when we were kids? So Citizen Sleeper, and it's available, I think, like anywhere. And I think it's so light, it would probably run off a Windows 98 computer if you needed
it.
Yeah.
I would like have a look on Steam. It's probably there. It'll run off of I think anything with a chip in it.
So there you go. That's my number 3. Here we go. We're getting to the good stuff now. Tom, what's your number 2 of the year?
Well, this one I'm hoping is a game that you've heard of. Zelda.
Oh, that game
from little indie developer Nintendo. Their latest iteration, Tears of a Kingdom. Did you play Breath of the Wild?
I did. I got about halfway through it. I didn't stop because it wasn't amazing. I just kind of I got distracted, I think. And I do need to go back and finish that. And I will get Tears of the Kingdom. I have not played it yet, but I love Breath of the Wild.
That is the interesting sort of backdrop to this, I think, as well, because I only just picked up a Switch this year. I feel like when consoles are reaching their end of their life cycle, that's when you're getting some of the best games coming out on them, or it's certainly the most ambitious. So yeah, picked up a Switch this year, thought I'd mop up all of the games that I've missed over the years, but I wasn't sure whether to start with Breath of the Wild or Tears of a Kingdom. I had it on good authority from a mutual friend of ours, actually, Massimo, who told us that if you have played Breath of the Wild, you'll probably burn out quite quickly on Tears of the Kingdom, because there's a lot that's similar. The map is effectively the same, just some additional elements. I've spoken to some other people as well who said largely the same, is that if you have played and absolutely loved Breath of the Wild, but you've only finished it recently, maybe wait a bit, because it is a lot more of the same, but some really smart additions to it.
Okay.
The smart additions being this very sort of rudimentary but yet brilliant construction mechanic. It's amazing how just building some things can completely overhaul a game, or at least as far as Nintendo are concerned, inject enough life into it to be able to roll out a lot of the same things again. But good God, is it fun to stick some fans on a bit of wood and then fly away. Extraordinary. There's very little not to love about that. I mean, I think if you haven't the patience for it, then you can actually probably get by ignoring a lot of the kind of build stuff on it. There's a handful of puzzles in there that I think certainly hinge on it, but yeah, a lot to love. I'm a sucker for anything where you can stick wheels on it and a rocket launcher and then be on your way. That's the absolute dream for me, and it feels like a weird game for them to have put that into, but nonetheless, it translates brilliantly well.
Amazing. Okay, so Zelda games not really famous for plot or story. I presume it's much the same here. You get a few cutscenes at the beginning.
Oh, go on. This is no different. No, it's exactly the Zelda's in trouble. You got to rescue Zelda. That's usually there's some sort of generic bad that's happening that seems to be taking over the land of Hyrule, and you need to go and sort of stop that. And there's a bit of a timey-wimey kind of element. I mean, I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface of it. Maybe this starts to pick up in the later acts, but that's not really why I'm playing. I'm playing so that I can attach more rocket launchers to wagons, apparently.
That's not why anyone plays a Zelda game. It gives you just enough. And I also like that Zelda games, when it comes to their story and really the gameplay, it's just kind of it's always just a bit of a remix and an iteration. You know, they don't ever. It's always Link and Zelda and Ganon, and there's always puzzles. It's like that's what Nintendo is so good at, and it's the same with Mario. Really, they figured out a long time ago what works, and they don't ever really change the secret sauce. They just kind of maybe just build on it or swap out little things or add things. And I thought Breath of the Wild was probably the biggest departure, really, from the traditional Zelda format, where it's go to this dungeon, then that dungeon, and get the thing that unlocks this thing. Whereas they didn't just half-arse an open world. They really did just like, here it is, off you go.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think they've built on that from this. So I think it is perhaps return to the realms of iteration. Certainly what they've iterated on here is quite massive, but you know, they've not completely rewritten the map. They've just added there's some stuff in the sky now, there's some stuff underground, but the land is largely still the land. And a lot of things have kind of returned from that. It's all of the stuff that worked previously, and they're just adding more toys into the toy box, which I think is great. But I think you touched on it there as well. It's the puzzles in this are something that absolutely top tier stuff. I don't think they get much better than this in terms of that really sort of cerebral left brain thinking that you need to do when you step into a room, being like, okay, here are all the pieces, now find a way out. It doesn't get much better than that in the Zelda games, I don't think.
Top tiers of the kingdom. And that's Tom's number 2. That's high on my list as well, and I have a Switch, so what am I waiting for? I'll tell you what, I'm waiting to get a lot of time. And also the number 1 game that I've got is basically eating up all of my time. But before we get to that, I'll tell you what my number 2 is. So my number 2 is a game that definitely didn't come out in 2023. It's a few years old. And again, it's on a lot of consoles. It's called Stellaris. It's a 4X strategy game. Have you heard of this?
Stellaris. I have heard of this. Yes. I have a feeling that's made by one of my favourite developers.
Yes, Paradox, I think they're called.
Paradox,
yes.
They make the City Skyline games.
Yes,
and
correct, yeah.
The amount of hours that I've pummeled into City Skyline, certainly the first one, the second one came out this year, which was a sketchy release, but they're patching. But yeah, the first City Skylines game was astonishing. Absolutely loved it.
Yes, I haven't played that. I want to, but and they these guys are famous for they just make strategy games, and they make incredibly deep and complex ones. They do a World War II one, I believe, and and they also support them. You know, you spoke about patching these games. Stellaris is years old, but they've released DLC for it, you know, like twice a year, basically. So they look after these games, and they build on them, and so in a way it is a new game. I'll give myself that. So Stellaris I played years ago on the PS4, and then I got a new MacBook this year, so I decided to throw it on that. And this is better run on a computer for sure, as you would expect with a real-time strategy game.
Go figure.
Yeah, you need a mouse for this. But this is a 4X space simulator. 4X, I looked it up because I was like, what is a 4X game actually? Where does that come from? So it actually comes from, it's a subgenre of strategy-based computer and board games, including both turn-based, I'm reading from Wikipedia here, and real-time strategy titles. The gameplay generally involves building an empire, and the name 4X comes from an abbreviation of explore, expand, exploit, exterminate.
I was really hoping it was going to be a 4X like, and 4X was a game that came out in like the 80s or something.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit of an XCOM like in a way. Although no, it's not, because you're not building an empire. So I guess the most famous example of this would be Age of Empires, I think, or Civilization. They fall into this category. So yeah, I'm a big sucker for this kind of thing. grew up playing. My favorite one as a kid was the Star Wars version of this, Star Wars Supremacy, or I think it was called Rebellion in the States.
Yeah.
Which you can also get on Steam, and that's a lot of fun. So it's basically a giant map of the galaxy, including the Milky Way. That's in there. All your favorites: Earth,
Andromeda.
Saturn.
Let's go.
Yeah, it's got it all. And it's basically Star Trek, right? So you've got a variety of species. You can be humans. You can be the Star Trek humans, the Federation humans, or you can be the militaristic sort of dark world from Star Trek, the mirror dimension.
The Terrans.
People. Yeah, exactly. Who are fascists essentially. Yeah. And there's a variety, so it suits a variety. It's races for every sort of play style you want. If you want to be a fascist dictator and conquer the galaxy, or if you want to be diplomatic and you can start a federation. You can enter into diplomatic negotiations with other species.
Can I be a NASA punk? That's the question.
I'm afraid not. That is exclusively the domain of Star Trek.
Draw the line.
Yeah. But that latter option sounds boring, because I think everyone intends to go into these games playing. Oh, it's just like Risk. You just conquer all the worlds and put their armies down, and that is the inclination. But I got to say that why I like Stellaris so much is that it's almost I found I tend to be more diplomatic. I tend to enjoy that more, and it's more rewarding, and it encourages you to do it because it gives you just enough of sort of interactions with alien species, just enough sort of sense of their worlds, and even little things happen. Like you can discover, just like Star Trek, you can discover a pre-FTL civilization on a planet you just arrive at, and all of this is just told through like one picture with some dialogue written under it. But it's always just compelling enough to be like, oh, I kind of want to, look after these people, and then you end up in interesting moral dilemmas, because, for instance, in that example, you might set up an observation station in orbit around them just to monitor them, in case they become interstellar warriors or
a tier 2 civilization.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then interesting conflicts happen, like there's two factions on that planet and they're about to nuke each other. Do you let it happen? Or
what do you do, Dave? Yeah, what do you do?
Exactly. And you get little dialogue options like that, with multiple choice answers, and so it's got a bit of a sort of role playing game vibe to it in that regard, and that's just enough to invest you more in these tiny specks that you're moving other tiny specks around to, and I find that incredibly satisfying. It's fun building an empire. I will give a warning to anybody who's intending to give this a go, even if you are familiar with 4X games or have played Age of Empires or whatever. This game is brutally complicated, and it takes no prisoners, and it has the worst tutorial imaginable. It's essentially non-existent. It refuses to hold your hands. It just throws you into this, and it's just an insane amount of resources that all do different things. Famously, I joined the game is famous for being like completely unfair, and I joined the subreddit for Stellaris, and there are people in there who have sunk up to 1,000 hours into this game, and they're still only discovering, like, they discover a whole section of gameplay that they didn't know existed because it's hidden behind a tab somewhere. So yeah, you can get lost in this game, but it is you kind of do just need to. I would suggest going on YouTube, and there's a lot of good videos, non-official videos by people being helpful that will explain the basics of this game. But it is incredibly rewarding. I sunk about 60 hours into it over the year, and it's a lot of fun.
I completely understand the appeal as well. And I'm still even now pumping hours after hours into Civilization, which similarly, where you have a completely bonkers resource system that sits in front of you and many sort of different win conditions. So this sounds right up my street, especially as well. I just had a quick look to see how many hours I'd put into City Skylines, and this was a COVID play, so it explains a lot, but I've done 400 and 46 hours
Oh,
of
wow.
going to City Skylines. So I don't know if I need another Paradox game on my horizons, but I'm very tempted now because I did always wonder if this was any good.
We might lose you forever. No,
It's been nice knowing you.
I can confidently say that this is your vibe, Tom. I think you would massively enjoy this. And I think there is a multiplayer component to this, which I've never done. But yeah, maybe when we're old and grey and have hundreds of hours to spare, we could
imagine a world where we have hundreds of hours to spare.
Bring on the apocalypse. I'll play you in the bunker.
One COVID later, and we'll talk.
All right, here we are, the number one of the year, and this game, my one has not been mentioned by you, which leads me to think this might be your number one as well. Is your number one of the year Baldur's Gate 3, Tom?
My number one of the year is Baldur's Gate 3. How did you guess?
Fantastic. Oh my god. How did I guess? Well, probably because it is sweeping up all the end of the Game of the Year awards and is clearly one of the best games ever made.
And rightly so, I think, as well. I know there was some backlash from that from people who have only played first-person shooters in their life and were like, why is this turn-based game winning? But it is extraordinary if you are into that kind of thing. If you've ever played an XCOM or even a Mass Effect or what's their other one, Dragon Age, or any of that kind of sort of stuff, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, this game is. It just blew me away. I mean, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. You know, I had my eye on the alpha release a few years ago, and I played the Baldur's Gate games back on my Windows 98 clunky thing. Baldur's Gate 2, Neverwinter Nights. I loved those games. I never knew that they were from Dungeons and Dragons. Just thought they were generic fantasy things. But later in life, as we've spoken about in this podcast, got into Dungeons and Dragons, and this game, I think, it's several things. It is firstly an incredible adaptation of the tabletop role playing Dungeons and Dragons experience. It's incredibly faithful to that. It brings that experience to life, I think, as closely as you could possibly get in a video game construct.
It's the best translation that I've seen of that as a format. I've seen some pale imitations, but in embracing the D&D mechanics and just bringing that into a digital realm, it's a perfect translation of that.
And even improving upon the previous games, how they did it, because the previous games were, I think, they had a more sort of streamlined approach to action. All the dice rolls were done behind the scenes, whereas what I love about Baldur's Gate 3 is they just brought that to the fore, right? They realized that people like to roll dice. I love rolling dice, and so clicking, part of it's such a simple pleasure, but just clicking that D20 on the screen and then watching it roll.
It's a physical manifestation of a dice that you see in game, as opposed to it being a random number generator hiding behind the scenes.
Yeah,
it all builds into that world. They've lent in full tilt, and I love it.
It's just such a simple thing, but it's beautiful. And Larian Studios, who makes this game, I played Divinity Original Sin 2, and I loved that. And this feels like a beautiful extension of that. Which it's full circle, because those games were inspired by D&D. I think they sought out this license for a long time. They badgered Wizards of the Coast to kind of get this, and eventually sort of got to a stage where they were confident they could do it. But the strengths of those games they translated perfectly to this with this D&D packaging. And what they've produced is a game that has, firstly, it's the best, I think, one of the best, if not one of the best video game RPG experiences you can have, in terms of just building a character, customizing, all that stuff. And then layering that with a fantastic story, some of the best voice acting you'll ever hear in video games, writing, and then the level of detail they've applied right down in this world. Anything you can think of doing, they've thought of it, right? They've anticipated it. You can cast a spell which allows you to speak with animals, and then you can go and talk to a cat or a mouse, and that cat or mouse will have recorded dialogue. Not only that,
rich lines of dialogue and opinions and thoughts.
Yes,
yes.
And that's exactly it. It's not like, Bethesda or who are the BioWare or any of the other great studios who we've already referenced, who will just often repeat NPC dialogue. You know, you and we've all heard the same with Grand Theft Auto. Wherever you walk past people, you NPCs, and they'll just give you the same. You know, oh, it's rainy out today, or
I used to be an adventurer like you.
Yeah, all this kind of stuff.
Some call this junk. Yeah.
Like, what's so incredibly good about this game is that they never repeat anything. They give every single character who can speak, as you said, rich, meaningful dialogue that's relevant to them, voiced by different people. It seems, and I'm sure there's some crossover, but largely this feels like a voice cast of hundreds with accents that are either incredibly well executed or people's original accents. There's a lot of Irish accents in this, which just feel like they got an Irish person.
It's so good, and I think that kind of bundles in with the characterizations and the writing, all sort of sit together. But in terms of a supporting cast for a game, I've never known anything quite like it in terms of that depth and breadth. Usually you get like a few characters written well, but to be able to do that for all of them is really, really unheard of.
Exactly. Some of the most memorable interactions you can have are with, you know, I don't want to spoil anything, but just like there's a woman in Act 1 who you rescue, and she doesn't want to be rescued, and it becomes, you know, it throws up very interesting moral dilemmas in that regard. But the other thing is the combat, and the gameplay in this is, you know, it's not repetitive. I think like a game like Diablo never appealed to me. I played a little bit of it because it's very just kind of just repetitive and grindy and hack and slash, and which appeals to a lot of people. I know those games are very popular, but what's good about Larian's games is that every combat, there are no two combat interactions the same. Even like a Final Fantasy would do this. You know, we're gonna fight these 4 guys again. Here we go. Every single encounter is different.
We had something very similar. I say we because I've been doing a co-op playthrough with a friend of mine, which is a whole other sort of dynamic to this as well, as opposed to just controlling your squad. You're controlling half the squad, it's you and one other, and they're controlling you and one other. And it's fascinating how the game can go left on you very quickly. If you get one thing wrong, or you say the wrong thing to the wrong goblin, or you like rummage through the wrong chest, it can spit out some really interesting encounters. But equally, we had our ass absolutely handed to us in an encounter with a bear. Where the bear decided it was just going to attack everyone. And we had our asses handed to ourselves, and then we were like, okay, we'll reload the save and then go again. You go again, you talk to the bear. It turns out the bear was a druid this whole time. It was a person disguised as a druid, or disguised as a bear. And then you go through the encounter again, you befriend the bear, and the bear fights with you, and it completely changes the dynamic of how it unfolds. But so many of those little interactions can result in any number of things. I think with so many games you have like it's A or it's B, and those are your options. But this is, you know, A and B with their own caveats, but also, you know, C through to Z ways that something could go down in any given encounter.
Yes, I had a similar experience where I agreed to assassinate some people. And so I did that, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and I stealthed in the shadows, and I assassinated X person. And then I found out later on the internet, X person was could be as a potential party member. You know, that person can join your.
You've missed out on your
party.
recruitment because you murdered them.
And there's a whole plot. They've got their own story. You can even have a relationship with that person.
Not anymore.
It was just like, no, I just chose to assassinate them. So yeah, you're right. There's a whole variety of options in this game. Like the depth of this game is incredible. It looks amazing. It just runs well. It's incredibly immersive. It is. Like it is just it's like perfection. They polished this to within an inch of its life, and you know when we're living in a world like when we get a release like Cyberpunk, which we should say seems to have been fixed now and is apparently great, and I do want to play it. Yeah. But when we live in a world where game studios are being rushed for deadlines, and there are a lot of pressures. You know, it seems like Larian just kind of have finessed their, like Nintendo, you know, have been honing their craft for a while, realized what works, and just spared spared no detail and gave this complete attention to everything. They anticipated everything. So it's an incredible achievement.
And props to Larian for that as well, because they don't have the backing of the AAA developers who have been making these massive games that have come out somewhat flawed. No, to that end, I'm sure they don't have the same crunch problems necessarily. But, the Larian team compared to a CD Projekt Red is tiny. They've just been hashing at this game for years. And I think one of the reasons that the gameplay in it is so tight and so vast is that because it's so heavily grounded in the D&D systems, that's effectively 50 years of playtesting they've had to get the back end right. And then all they've had to do, he says like it's easy. But one of the means that they can spend more time bringing all of these worlds to life, these characters, and embellishing it with a really, really rich narrative. And the Baldur's Gate series is an interesting one because it used to be owned by BioWare. And BioWare, of course, made Mass Effect.
Yes.
The heydays of Mass Effect was brilliant. Now that license sits with Larian. I'm not sure of the movements of people, but they've been building on a legacy of people who have known what they're talking about, what they've been doing for a long time. It is sitting on the shoulder of giants, but it absolutely sees further, just to really labour that analogy.
Yeah, they have become giants. So yeah, look, I think we could spend hours gushing on this game, but we should wrap this up. I listed off a few things I didn't get to play, which I think we should mention. I'm sure you've got a few as well. That Mario game where he turns into an elephant looks like fun.
Wonder.
Yeah,
yes.
That's it. Thank you.
Good,
yeah.
thanks.
I will probably play that at some stage. Dave the Diver looks great.
Dave the Diver. Everyone loves Dave the Diver. Yeah. Didn't get a chance to. It's the little sushi making diving game.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of fun.
For some reason, a smash hit. Yeah, no, it does.
And again, looks very charming. And what else? Spider-Man 2 I want to play. Cyberpunk we mentioned. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up, Tom?
Yeah, there's a little game called Dredge, which I didn't get a chance to, where I think you play a little trawler ship that goes fishing, but in slightly spooky waters. But yeah, another little indie game, kind of inventory management-y type thing, but looks like a great deal of fun. And, of course, Alan Wake 2, part of the Remedy series. I loved the... Oh, God, what was it called? I loved it so much I can't remember the name of it.
Max Payne?
Max Payne was brilliant. Yeah, that was them. But also the other one, Control. Really
Control was great.
Yes.
Yeah. And I read somewhere that these are all set in the same universe as well.
They're setting up a bit of a crossover universe, I think, is what they're kind of running for. But I'm not sure. I hear there's rumours of there being more Max Payne on the way. But yeah, the Alan Wake series, I think, is a really interesting one to kind of build out.
Yes, that's a good game. It's kind of like Twin Peaksy sort of Stephen King vibes. Yeah, that first one was was a lot of fun. All right, Tom, thanks very much for joining me for our top four games of the year. And thanks everyone for listening. Big shout out to Paul Wallace as well in the Cinemal Patreon, who is our number one fan. He asks every year, are we going to be doing this? And every year I say absolutely. And every year the lists get smaller and smaller until eventually
you can look forward to our top two next year.
All right, Tom, as always, thanks so much. Do you want to plug anything? Do you want to
no, you just Google me. It might be useful to you. Tom Silcock, that's me. That's my name. Silcock. You'll find me.
There he is.
Always a pleasure.
Google Tom Silcock. And if you do want to reach out, I'll pass on any messages to Tom. As always, we are at thecinemile@gmail.com if you want to email us, or at thecinemile on Instagram or Letterboxd, although there's not much video game chat on Letterboxd. And of course, Kathy and I have done our best movies of the year and our best TV episodes of the year, so all of that is up in the feed, so go have a listen to those. And thanks for listening, and Tom, I'll see you next year.
Thanks, Dave. Pleasure as always.
Well, I won't. I'll see you before then. But they'll listen to us next year. Okay. Bye, everyone. Bye, Tom.
Place your heart with mine. Let your sleeping soul take flight. Take me through the night. Down, down, down by the river. Down, down, down by the river.
I'm Laura.
I'm Lauren.
And this is go love yourself. And she went, you're 26? I was like, size 26, yeah. And she was like, oh, right, that makes sense.
This is the show where we're learning to love ourselves a little more and taking you along with us.
I grew up never seeing anybody that looked like me, and that made me feel like not part of society, like almost like not a woman, because I just never felt like I fit in.
If you've got a relative that is mean about your body, Laura, what do we say to them?